Thank you, Ron. That was one of the best reviews I've ever had. And thank everybody involved with the tree reading series, Dean and Rod and Rona. They've been great to invite me into your family. Obviously, you guys are a very close group, so I feel honored to be involved. As Rod had suggested, writing these poems presented a bunch of problems, not just formally, but emotionally and sort of personally as well. But what I did find was I started to, channel this character. I felt, having read his memoirs, that there was something in common that he and I shared. And all my previous stumbling with language was suddenly being transformed somehow. So it was just a great ride writing these poems. And I hope you enjoy some of them. Let me say right off the bat that the term nerve language is not mine, and there's a bunch of language in here that isn't mine. It is Daniel's, and it comes from his memoirs, which, as I told Rod and Rona before our little event here, the memoirs are still in print. They were published in 1903, and they're still around because people are still analyzing them. This is this is the only surviving memoir of someone who has experienced this kind of intense mental illness. And it was written during his involvement with that illness. All other memoirs we have of this kind of event are after the subject has, healed himself or herself. So this is a really interesting look into the mind of someone who is severely disturbed. And the actual idea that the guy could be writing while this is happening is amazing. So yes, Freud and Jung and everybody had a crack at this guy through his writing. So it's all writing. It's not on the couch. And the whole 20th century has been devoted in psychoanalytic literature to looking at various aspects of these memoirs. You should get your hands on them. They are an amazing read. Absolutely amazing. The guy's use of, even in translation, it's quite amazing. So, what is nerve language? Well, who really knows, right? But it is the language for Schreber in which God created the world and destroyed it again, continually. So for Schreber, constant creation, constant destruction. How do you live in a world like that? Well, maybe we do right now. But God speaks to Schreber in this language. Okay, what would that sound like? That would be pretty strange. So here's a little look at what Blanchot calls the outside, which is everything that's beyond, that we cannot grasp, that desire needs, and that we don't have, and that we're always looking for. One of those things is maybe God, or the completion of desire. The outside. Whenever the outside flares at the limit, whenever the leaves of its trees glint and blind, whenever the locusts of the outside go underground and take with them their shattering colors and mandibles, whenever the loss of words wakens you, lying along its border, stretched out like a knife at the foot of the wall, the knife that scratches away at the mortar around a few stones. Whenever you must ask what the outside is, with its brutal and free music. And what is it that conducts the outside to you, like shards of mica? Whenever you think it is the place you have lived, whenever angels, fiery beings, a woman's fingers on your brow, the impossible bliss of what looks into you, reveals itself by withdrawing, tearing the muscle off your bone. Whenever you remember what has not yet happened, even for a second, the shimmered world, pierced through reflection, light on the river beyond the wall, just visible from a window, beckons, where the dead children escape their status and their names, and you've gone inside out. I'm just going to read you a little footnote. One of the dimensions of this book is that it has frustrating footnotes. You read a poem and you go to the footnote and you think, oh, well, okay, this is going to explain this kind of mad poem. But in fact, the footnote is even stranger than the poem. Or the footnote explains something that's not in the poem. Or some such thing. But here we have a little historical introduction that actually sort of makes sense. Perhaps, dear reader, you will be familiar with the memoirs of my nervous illness, with appendices and an addendum about the question, under what circumstances can a person considered insane be detained in an asylum against his will? That's the title of the book. Published in the year after my freedom, 1903, which began a cascade of scribbling throughout the century from the likes of Freud, Jung, and Bleuler to Canetti, Niederland, Lacan, Deleuze, and Anthony Wilden, not to mention many others less famous. Beginning with Freud, in 1911, who had been busy suppressing longings for his colleague Fliess in the wake of the dissolution of that friendship. In fact, almost at the exact moment Freud and Fliess were discussing the unconscious for the first time, I was deprived of my freedom in Dresden, halfway between Fliess's Berlin and Freud's Vienna. That would have been 1895. Now, surely these Denkwürdigkeiten are enough for everyone, at least for everyone to use as evidence. Even too much. Overwrought with systematizing, overwritten with an eye to impossible proof. And appended documents, medical reports, hospital charts in the new translations. It does not give way on principle. But I must now confess that it is not all I wrote during those terrible years of my confinement. And what your eyes now witness, this, is something quite different, something I had hidden away from the guards and the doctors and the others. Although many keys carried across to the other side, such as you will find in Voluptuousness is a State of Mind, naturally occur in both, writing the memoirs would enable my freedom. The writing of these, the release of something else. Against the crenulating, the constant rustling of the noises and the voices, against the forensic languages and official pronouncements, the forking lightning of the nerve language, and how a human being in many places at once might learn to listen. So voices. Schreber suffered from voices, as many schizophrenics do. One of the dimensions of the voices that he heard were that they were extremely annoying and insistent, toying with him in this way. If I can find the poem. Complete the following. The thought of you there breaks, is what the voice would say. Beyond discipline is struck by. Is the sweep of petals against skin, opening a tear in thee. Inhalation of stars into my brain could. The terrible whispered smoke of. Might all the lost ones reside in my manhood is, why not live this body as memory wouldn't? Think of the rays as the basic language says. But if there were somewhere, somehow, to get there, I would. Yes, and Jung. He didn't want to have much to do with that reductionism. And he gave Freud the totem. And so it began. I like to think that I made a small contribution, but who actually gets cured? There is always more suffering in the world than the world can embrace. It burns off in smoke everywhere. I myself believe in the oldest stories. They're flying through the blood. Aredvi Sura Anahita, still flowing from the sacred mountain to the sea in her voluptuous way. God needing us like food.
Wow.
Arahidra Sura Anahita is one of the major rivers flowing out of the mountains in Persia. And this guy, who was a prominent judge in Saxony in 1890, he was a big dude, but he was well-read. And he had read, just like Nietzsche, about the same time, all about Zoroastrianism and Persian religion. So his family and his educational background and the whole context of Europe at that time, of course, was giving everybody Christianity. And here are these two wacko guys, Nietzsche and Schreber, go off and study Zoroastrianism. And Schreber's notion of the cosmos becomes more and more infected or influenced by that religion. And so, I'm going to read a little Persian poem, The Passion. The very first moan is steeped in hungering for the hymn of God. The her, the whore, the sun, raised, arrayed in damask of Persian blue, sky-y ripples. A little fire of pomegranate twigs on the piano. This, the end of the human, its limit of longing. The towers of silence carrying the dead upward, rushing into the sky, into the heavy floating wings, the red, naked raid of the heads of vultures. It may be a scream, miracle to break past the boundaries, the borders of what was thought love. This sea of sky, this sky-crashed boat. There's a bunch of kind of Persian referenced poems in the Persian Cafe section of the book. Now, Schreber had a psychotic incident in the early 1890s, and he confined himself to Dr. Flechsig's asylum in Switzerland. And within a few months, he recovered and returned to his position as a judge. But a couple of years after that, he had a second incident and went back to Flechsig's clinic. And he didn't emerge for 7 years. First few months, he voluntarily admitted himself. But after a few months, there was some kind of wrangling with his wife about who was going to control money for the house. And his employer, the court in Saxony, was thinking, what is it with this guy? He's going in and out of asylums. And Flechsig himself thought, I don't know, we're just going to commit him. So, all of a sudden, he's there against his will. And this is when things start to go really badly for him. I mean, he's had incidents and he's had experiences and strange things are going on, but once he's committed, then this whole adversarial thing starts to produce other things in him. He begins to make contact with the rays. And the rays are God. God speaking to him in the nerve language. God torturing him. And so I'm going to read a ray poem. Endless War. They would let fly and open up their narrowness, such that even the piano was often an object of their miracles. I couldn't dream any louder, trying to keep them at bay. But no dreaming of any kind would be effective against them. They spun out their instincts, and then the attendants would lock me in the cell, windowless and with stuffing for walls. And when they closed the door behind me, I thought I'd never see another morning and lost all hope of ever greeting you again. The clang of endless war makes me long for the not thinking of anything thought. These are the kinds of phrases he comes up with, right? The not thinking of anything thought. Wow. The voluptuousness of rays spending themselves in me, finally surrendering their imagos of murder. This one's called From the Distant World. The paths of the rays are more direct than mere light that bends and wants to know something of objects. The rays are God's object. There is for them no inside. the rays piercing into the room to slice off the heads of the water iris, slicing into the innards of the one lying in whiteness, limbing the fine filaments of nerves and turning them into floating motes of dust, hot with contact and engraved with instruction. To live for days, just a few days from them. The big moth of the lungs, hemorrhaged. The blood moth, oxygen moth. What is dissolving, rising up as if out of the grave? In the territory of the voluptuous. How the juicy body waters the desert of the mind, now as if something were coming back. There is an outside not different from an inside, taking a deep breath of harrowed air. So, voluptuousness sort of continues to play this role in Schreber's life, and it becomes, initially, like the rays, it was a terrifying experience he was being forced to submit to. But then something happens, and he sort of gives into it, and he gets to see inside it. And it becomes a kind of salvation to him. Everything that was negative gets turned somehow. And that's one of the things that really appealed to me about what could be just a really sad and depressing situation. Right? Schreber is not that kind of guy. He's mad, he's insane, but he still has the wherewithal. He's writing these memoirs to prove to the court that he's not insane. He can have his religious vision. It doesn't matter what they say. It's his. It's genuine. Experience is experience. Right? He's not insane. That's his argument. Anyway. Some voluptuousness. By the windows of keyholes. By the eyes of birds. By the bead of blood. By the dark drops of apple seed. And the mica gleam of salmon scale. By the notes hung on gibbets of air. Flung out like smashed sweat. By the ember of heart banked under the tear in the earth. By the sisters whose ears refused the drink of words. By the mother who polished the skies. By the spirit whisper of pine woods. By the broken slash of mirror in the wrist of the river. By the sieved pearl of the split second. By the water table of truth. In the asylum library, slipping through the U and the I. Smooth, adamant, archaic, aflame. How am I doing on time here, bro? Here's another voluptuous poem. Little Throats. He's talking about God here. He would blow on my body until brains slid out the pores in the reek of unwashed sheets, each with the name of a swan. Come closer, my little ones, arrive at me, only one limit of a freedom you can almost imagine the outside of. Do not think of history as the already written, the reports of the doctors. The memoirs were counterproof and had to be meticulous. Caution governed me. You will find me on the far side of power. Little poems, holding out your hands as if you were blind. Make me still, little throats. So, during this time of his confinement, he was further confined into solitary for about 2.5 years, intermittently, mostly at nights. But this is like pre-Freud, it's pre-everything, and they really did not have a great idea of what to do with these people. So occasionally, Schreber is there at the table of Dr. Flechsig and his family having dinner, and at other times he's being thrown into solitary confinement. And it's like a child. If the guy's behaving improperly, then bam, away he goes. If he talks civilly, he can come to dinner. So here's my solitary poem. Sink. One tap. One bench with bedding. One toilet. Single high horizontal pipe. One grate. One standing for 2.5 years every night in the questioning place. Fingers like spiders skittering up the blind fabric walls as if underground. Paralyzed. Draped. One stone floor. One would hear whimpering, but the voices wouldn't hear completion. Squirmed with their tipped poison. One is only the outline of their attack. Shadow room. No one's room. One? No. Rays pierce an eye, creating an iris for themselves and a looking. Another event for Schreber was the writing down system. Another sort of fantastic phrase. You can imagine, like German sort of allows itself these kinds of sort of conjunctive trains of words, right? It creates phrases by sticking things together, whereas in French and in English we use like of and we make long phrases, whereas they make one big train of a word. So the writing down system is like one word. And it's what God does to sort of keep track of him. And this is where the sort of paranoia is most prominent. And so every little detail of his life he figures is being watched. But then he has a revelation. At least this is what I imagine a revelation for him might be while he is writing these memoirs. And, of course, these poems. The writing down system. It occurs to me that I myself am the writing down system that wants to capture everything, even the space between breaths, the coffee stains on the white shirt cuff, the diagonal sigh of the bishop across the board, the careless shrug of the shoulders, the lingerie drawer half open or 3/4 closed, the orange rind on the windowsill, the scent of orange, the fingertips in the dust, the glance that finds exactly what it's looking for. But there is nothing here now but pen and paper and darkness they do not let me out of. I cannot move not even into the periphery of dream. The darkness is lucid with folds of satin. I cannot reply. Freedom sustains itself on limitation here. The endless limitation of words. I am writing on the other side of writing. So, he's writing away, he's finishing his memoirs, and he appeals his case to the very court that he was fired from. And he appeals it once, and he's returned to confinement. And he appeals it again. Doesn't give up. And, of course, in courts, there's lots of questions, forensic situations. So I'm going to read you a little forensic poem here. There'll be the questions, which, if you answer properly, you're sane and you can go free. And if you don't, well. So the thing is, does he answer these properly? And he was very careful about this. That's not the one I want. 3 forensic questions. Can it be maintained that there exists a morbid mental derangement? Like evaporation from stony ground after a desert downpour? Like a library of books come to life, lifting off the pages? The mind is a fiercely abstracted traveler, becoming the way. Would liberty be a danger to himself or to others? Oh, blind knowledge that saves us from what? The filigree nerve contact, as fine as the song of electricity running through things. Is he incapable of looking after his own affairs? You fling out your minions, who clatter to the ground like spent arrows. Trees spring up. I walk with my daughter in the greening woods. So he goes to court, and on Bastille Day, 1902, he gets his freedom. Unbelievable. He returns to his wife, his daughter. He has 7 good years before his wife dies and then his mother passes away, and his life does not end well, but he has 7 good years after this. So I'm going to read a good poem, and this will be the last. The Reverie. The long clinamen of commentary reaching backward to an unclaimable origin, where what happened to us we did not experience and waits to occur. The still to come. The verb to be. The unlocking of the gates and the throwing away of the key. Cloud break at sunset, smudging your skin with darkening ruddy gold light. And all along the edge of evening, your looking, that is my language, unraveling me, which is not an image, but the space beyond it, vastly emptied, a reverie that has yet to wash over us. Thank you.